So chapter 1 is Introduction to Global Marketing. And this subject is very multifaceted, and it's, as I stated in the class and also on the post, this is a class that gets into marketing in a different level of analysis, meaning that everything in this class is global and everything in this class is marketing. And so also in marketing, you have to lay a foundation and give a historical context. And so what happens here is you have some different points where they go in history and they talk about how the international economy had evolved over a period of time. And we all know that the international economy has evolved over centuries. And we're talking about the 15th century when the Spanish ships and the Portuguese ships set sail to find the New World, and they began these trading expeditions, traveling to the Western Hemisphere, traveling to the continent of Africa, the Spice Islands off the coast of Africa, India, the Indian subcontinent, then Asia, and they had these expeditions where they would bring back all of these valuable goods from these different places. And so that was the forerunner of this economy that we now have. That set the foundation for the economy that we currently have. A lot of very important events occurred. We know in the 19th century that you had an increase in this trade activity. There were a number of theories. If you remember from previous classes, you may have heard of absolute advantage and comparative advantage, which these are trade theories, which are really describing how countries make decisions in terms of what they specialize in and what they actually import. So you have these different models that were actually conceived over a period of time in the 18th century and in the 19th century. Then you had certain political events in the 20th century, 2 world wars, the First World War and the Second World War, very important in establishing the environment for trade. Now, in the first half of the 20th century, we had World War I, World War II. After World War II and during World War II, there were organizations that were created, most notably the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and you had the World Trade Organization that was founded in 1940. Well, actually, it was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was founded in 1947. And then in 1995, it became the World Trade Organization. The United Nations was founded in 1945 after the end of the war. So you had all of these organizations that were created and that developed this platform of trade that we now have. So a number of things occurred after the war. The United States was the preeminent power because, of course, most of Europe was destroyed from the war. And this country was not only the foundation and the strongest power, but the currency, the US dollar, was going to be the backbone of the system, and to this day is still the backbone of the system. So when all of this occurred and when European nations rebounded and came back online, you had another burst of trade. And most notably, the Americans were importing more goods from Europe. And I might add, going into tremendous debt as well. So marketing this is the AMA definition, the American Marketing Association definition. The activity, set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. You may remember seeing that definition from Principles of Marketing, but there are some key words here. Processes, marketing is a process. That means that you have certain activities that occur in order to make these marketing activities successful. And you have another key word here, exchanging. Well, what is a market? We know a market is an arena of buyers and sellers, and those buyers and sellers engage in exchanges. The buyer gets goods that they want or services rendered. The seller gets compensation for the goods and services that they have sold. These goods and services offer value for that buyer. And then, of course, that seller has to ensure that they understand the customer and that that customer is satisfied. And if they're not satisfied, how they can make changes in order to make that product better or render that service in a more in terms of the quality, making it more feasible for them to provide that quality service. So what is global marketing? If marketing is a set of activities and processes where exchanges being are being fostered between buyers and sellers, then what is global marketing? Well, there's a difference in levels of analysis. As you can see in the matrix here, this is the product market growth matrix. You have this matrix looks at the products that you have, whether they are existing products or new products, whether you have existing markets or new markets. So when you penetrate in a country, let's say you have an export situation. You're exporting to another country. You have an existing product, but you're going to a new market. And you're going to a new market because you want to expand your horizons. Maybe your domestic market is saturated and you want to tap into a foreign market. It doesn't mean you have to go halfway around the world to engage in international business, or let's say engage in activities with other countries. You can engage in trade with Canada, which is the northern neighbor, or Mexico, which is the southern neighbor. You can have partnerships in the Caribbean or Latin America. These are places that are relatively close. And these existing markets may be ripe for new products later on after you've established your presence. So the first thing is that you have existing products going into existing markets. And you may already have business there, but you want to increase the level of your presence in that country. You have situations where you have brand new products that you want to launch into an existing market. You have new markets, totally new markets that you have not tapped before, with products that you're trying to get rid of. This is one way. If you have inventory as a company and you're trying to get rid of that inventory, you can look for new markets because of the product life cycle. Maybe your product is in the decline phase, but you're looking for markets that are in the growth phase. And you remember the product life cycle, which was introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. So if you're in the decline phase, you want to find a country that's in the introduction or growth phase. That way, they will pay a premium for those products because they're rare and they have a demand for those products. And because of price elasticities, they won't have any substitutes. And so then they will have to pay a premium for that product. And then finally, you have new products, brand new products going into brand new markets. And sometimes companies have to create new products because the products they currently have, even with adaptation, simply will not work. And so you have to create an entirely new product for a new market. So this is the product market growth matrix. There are lots of different matrices and all of these frameworks in marketing, and in global marketing it is no different. So there are a number of different issues when you talk about marketing abroad. There are different rules. When you read the Best Frozen Foods case, in that case you will see a lot of different rules that were located or that were discovered in Germany. And I will just actually pull this Best Frozen Foods case over so we can get a look at it. And we're going to discuss this on Thursday. And this is obviously a fictitious case, as you can tell by the names. F. Rosen, or Frozen, president of Best Frozen Foods Company, is seeking to go into a new market. He's seeking to go into Germany because he understands that there's a market for frozen foods at the commissaries, which is the stores on the military bases, and he wants to expand out in Germany. So he is putting NEW Market or New Market on the case, and NEW Market comes back and he finds all of these different issues. And you will note the different issues that is constraining for these products going into Germany. I believe they even said West Germany, so this is a very old case because West Germany ceased to exist in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell, it's very important to have a grip on history, because as a business person going overseas, you want to know the environment that you're going into. You want to know the climate, and you want to know the sensitivities of the places that you're going, because it just makes a difference in terms of your insight, in terms of the expectations that you may have going in. There are other issues such as counterfeiting, piracy in China, and other places, not just China. We like to pick at China because, yes, piracy is rampant in China. But in another number of other places, you can also find that piracy is widespread. I have a video that I like to show in my classes, and it's called The 10 Worst Knockoffs. And it shows different categories of products that have been copied, from toys to soft drinks to athletic apparel to cell phones to candy. All of these things have been targeted. Not to mention, when we talk about fast foods, those are also pirated. So you have a lot of issues when you go abroad, and you have to ensure that you have a country that has will offer you protection so that your products are not stolen, because essentially that's what happens. So it says here, it's a quote from John Quelch. I remember reading him as a doctoral student, Jathryn Jose. They state that the best global brands are also the best brands, which is essentially saying that before you establish a global brand, you should establish a foundation at home first before embarking abroad. I want to show you a couple of articles, and these articles are articles where companies have decided that they're going to expand overseas. In this first article deals with Nestle's. And Nestle's, as you know, produces lots of different consumer products. And here you have these merchants, and this is in the outskirts of Brazil. And many times when you're in the outskirts, you don't have the ability to move around. The mobility is limited. You don't have access to certain resources. And so here they have hired these merchants to sell products to the people in the remote areas with this buggy, which looks like a buggy. And that is a convenience. That is a convenience for the people in that area. But the criticism is that most of what they're selling is processed foods, and they link that to obesity. And so, as a company, you have to also be a good corporate citizen, which means you have corporate social responsibility. And so, you don't want to make it appear that you're contributing to a health problem there in terms of obesity. Very interesting article. And again, in Brazil, where they're in the outskirts, and people are just trying to make an honest living, to be honest. You have other cases. When you talk about this idea of multinational marketing, you have, as we again talk about the obesity issue and fast foods, we see Kentucky Fried Chicken is being highlighted here as a contributing factor to the increasing obesity rates in Ghana. And there's again, this is New York Times, and they talk about the case and the difference in how their chicken is prepared using palm oil, and then they also have other different types of side dishes. And you'll note that many countries, when they receive a franchise, there are adaptations that are made to the menu. And here you have Ghana, and they're going to show a picture below of the chicken being dipped in the palm oil, which is supposedly a very saturated form of fat. So here you see the correlation between fast food sales and income. It's a very big business. When you go to South Africa, there's a Kentucky Fried Chicken seemingly on every square block. There's a chicken, and you can see the orange tint that would be palm oil. And so that is a case of Kentucky Fried Chicken. And lastly, you have McDonald's going into India. Now, what is so unique about that? Well, what is unique about McDonald's going into India? We know that McDonald's sells what? Primarily hamburgers. It is a fast food giant, and their main central item on the menu is the Big Mac. And in general, it's hamburgers. So they also sell other types of sandwiches, but the Big Mac is the sandwich that you can find at any location around the world. But what's unique about India is in India, slaughtering a cow is against the law. And because they're predominantly Hindu, Hindus do not consume beef. And so then there becomes this issue of how do you adapt the menu to suit the Indian consumer behavior. And here you have an article on that talking about the vegetarian lifestyle of many of the citizens there. And here you have the menu. different adaptations. Paneer salsa wrap. Paneer is cheese. They have the filet of fish, and they have a lot of other different variations to the McDonald's menu. And of course, McDonald's and a lot of fast food companies, when you go abroad, you'll notice that they're more family oriented as opposed to the United States, where you're just going to pick up something and go to the drive-through, or go and pick something up, take it home, and have it there, or eat it in a restaurant. But here you have entire families engaging in this experience. So these are some of the different cases. There are literally hundreds, thousands of these cases. Because let's be honest, as we at the half-hour mark, there is more business overseas than it is at home, for the simple fact that we have 7.8 billion people on the planet and only 330 million in the United States. So obviously there are more people abroad than there are here domestically. So that is what makes it so attractive when these companies seek to go abroad. Now, this value chain is comprised of activities. And I've posted behind me, you see this example of the value chain is comprised of marketing, production design, or R&D, manufacturing, and logistics. Logistics is how do you get the product from point A to point B? Supply chain management, how do you optimize the entire supply chain from procurement, getting your supplies, getting your ingredients, designing, manufacturing, marketing, logistics, customer service, is the entire supply chain. As a company, you have to offer a value proposition. What is a value proposition? A value proposition is a promise. The company is making a promise that they will offer you certain types of benefits if you buy their product. That benefit could be convenience. It can be based on price. It can be based on durability. It can be based on customization. It can be based on a number of things that you may find important. So that value proposition is stating that if you buy my product, you will get this benefit from buying my product. You will get the utility from this product. And that is what a value proposition is. And so it says that a company creates value for customers by improving benefits or reducing price, or some of the other things that I have just mentioned. So they have this formula of what determines value. Benefits divided by price. So obviously, if your price is lower, price being in the denominator, then your value increases, right? If your benefits increase more than your price, then your value also increases because that equation gets bigger, okay? So value is benefits divided by price. Now, many companies decide that they want to compete in this market, and they understand that there are parameters. Of course, you all remember the economics, supply and demand, right? And you remember the axes, the y-axis and the x-axis. What are the elements on the y and the x-axis? You have price and you have quantity, right? And so with your price, that will determine, or that will impact the demand. You have an equilibrium. Remember that? You have demand equals supply, and that's the equilibrium right in the center point. So when demand equals supply, everybody's happy. The seller is selling at the price that they want to sell. The buyer is buying the product at the price they want to buy. That's the equilibrium. Anything above or below the equilibrium mean that there is friction in the market. There are inefficiencies, and there may be a surplus or there may be a shortage. Now, if you're a company and you're able to sell at an equilibrium price, but you're able to provide more value, then you have a competitive advantage because you're offering more value for the customer. If you're able to give them more benefits as a relation to price, or if you're able to give them a lower price as it relates to benefits, then you have what is said to be a competitive advantage. Another quote, Jay Barney, created when a firm has value creating strategy not simultaneously being implemented by any current or potential competitors. So you have to find your specialty. You have to find what you're good at. You have to find niche markets. A niche market is a market that is not currently being served. And if you're a smaller company, sometimes you can fill a very specific niche and gain your presence in that market. Globalization is a lot of things, means a lot of things, and it has a lot of different ways that people look at it. Globalization is a process, it is an action, and it is also something that people use to describe a stage, that you have a certain level of globalization. When you talk about going abroad, you have globalization of markets, globalization of production. Globalization of markets are like those articles that I just showed you dealing with consumer products, looking for markets overseas, and trying to understand how the 4 P's need to be adapted. We know the 4 P's, right? We have product. You may have to change your product. You may have to change your price. You may have to change the way you promote it. And you may have to change the way you distribute it. And we notice in the Nestle article that I showed you, you had the woman pushing the buggy. So that was a different method of distribution, because those who may be in the city, perhaps it wouldn't be cost effective or be cost prohibitive to actually have trucks coming in and out. And so you have this person or maybe persons who actually distribute these products using these carts. And so that was an example of distribution or place being adapted to suit that particular market. Many different aspects of global industries. As I mentioned, you have global marketing, which means you look at the expanse of the globe as a market. If you have international means between or at least two. Multi means what? Means several. It can be 3 or more. Typically, when you say multi, you mean multiple or you mean 3 or more. When you say inter means at least 2. And global means that it's all encompassing of, all of the countries. And so the levels of globalization depend on the ratio of cross-border investment to total capital investment. The more cross-border or international investment, the more you have vested in the global market, and the more you can consider yourself to be a global company. A few ideas here in strategic focus. You have a lot of purchases of companies. So much so that sometimes you don't know who owns what. You don't know what company is owned by what parent company, or what country is that product or that company native to. There are lots of different cases. In fact, there are a couple of articles, and I've just pulled up an article that shows you that you have a lot of American companies that, or even companies that we think are American but are actually foreign owned because they were a majority stake was purchased by a foreign entity. So then they effect become a foreign company. And we're talking about companies like Budweiser and Church's Chicken and Ben and Jerry's, and many of these companies are now foreign owned. If you talk about Firestone, and you're saying to yourself, these are American companies. And it just so happened that Burger King was even once foreign owned, is now back into American ownership, but it had changed hands a couple of different times. It was owned by a Brazilian company, it was owned by a British company, and now it is owned by a conglomerate. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they are headquartered in Miami, or at least the controlling share is from investors in Miami. Pros and cons of globalization as we wind down. You have a lot of pros, and in my global business class, I'll talk about this in greater detail. The first chapter in global business is called Globalization. And globalization is, again, it's a platform, it's an idea that countries are more interconnected or more interdependent. And because of the interdependence, you have a supply chain where countries specialize in certain activities. And when you specialize, that means that what your country does best and what they have the resources to do, they will specialize in that, and then they will export the benefits to the other countries. All the other countries have specialties as well. They export what they're good at, everybody benefits, right? So in globalization, you have this increased efficiency, and you have an increased array of products and services that you have available, that are available to you. And so that's supposedly better for everyone, is that you have more options. Now, with more activity, you have more employment, more jobs, and then obviously more jobs, people are earning incomes, and then they spend more. So you have this cycle of prosperity being built. You have, obviously, companies are happy that citizens of that country have more money to spend. So you have some benefits. You have specialization, you have an increase in the number of choices, you have the creation of jobs, and you have a more robust global economy. Now, there's some side effects to that, and there have actually been protests, not like the one we had last Wednesday, but in some instances, the issue was just as critical, because you had these people protesting, saying that globalization is contributing to poverty of developing nations because the richer nations exploit the poorer nations for their cheap labor, cheap resources, and the fact that these smaller nations don't have leverage. And so it says here, not all gains from globalization have been evenly distributed. We see now, they mentioned Trump. So we have a new addition. They were able to get Trump in these examples. America First agenda is an example of nations retreating to protectionism and isolation, which means that now, instead of all of these agreements and all of these relationships, you're saying, okay, we're going to pull back and we're going to manufacture at home. Even though we have higher wages, that would be good for Americans, right? You have more jobs coming in. And of course, labor is relatively expensive here. And so companies would then have to make some adjustment in their prices so that they can recoup their cost. Okay, so you're correcting one problem and you're creating others as well. And that's essentially what is happening here. So you have globalization in reverse, or you have a retrenchment. Companies like Apple, manufacturing in China, decides that they want to retrench and they want to bring more jobs from China back to the United States. So it's globalization in reverse. Standardization versus adaptation. The idea that you standardize means that you're taking a product that you have in your product line and you're going to export it as is. No changes or very few changes. Which you may say that is a good thing because I don't have to spend extra money repackaging it, coming up with a new promotion, coming up with a new package, and coming up with essentially what would be increased expenses. And having to come up with a new ad campaign, it's okay. It can be very costly to do that, to have to adapt the product that you've already created. So standardization is keeping everything the way it is. You have both your products and your promotion. So you can standardize both your product and promotion. That's one thing you can do. For adaptation, you can adapt both your product and promotion. What are the other options? You can standardize your product or keep it the same and adapt your promotion, or you can adapt your product and standardize your promotion. So you have 4 options, and you have a last option, which is to make a brand new product. Not a product that you adapt or standardize, but a brand new product for that market. So you have some great options. You have options in terms of what number of countries you want to target. Single country marketing strategy, you have the 4 Ps. If you're talking global, now you also have to look at the 4 Ps, but you have to look at the factors. You have to look at the political environment, the economic environment, the social environment, technological, competitive. You have to look at the geography, the lay of the land, the terrain, the humidity, the climate. You have to look at a number of different factors when you go abroad because it's different. Now you get into comparative, this cross-cultural marketing, which is very different. Then they get into some of the markets. You may have heard of the BRICS nations here. The MINTs, which is a relatively new construct, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. These are very large countries. Mexico has one of the most populous cities. Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world, believe it or not. Nigeria is the largest country, most populous country on the African continent with about 200 million people. Turkey is a very strategically important country, which is between the Middle East and Europe. And so it has access to a very large market. And I believe it has been trying for a number of years to become part of the European Union. I believe there are 28 countries as part of that union. And Turkey is a very influential member or aspiring country to become a member of the European Union. Okay, as I wind down, a few more slides, this idea of global localization. There's a concept you might hear called glocalization, or being global and local at the same time, which means that you have a global mindset, but you have to consider the local environment. all of the things that I mentioned before, what I call in global business uncontrollable factors: political, legal, economic, financial, social, cultural, technological, competitive environment, geographic. All of these are factors that you have to consider when you localize into a foreign entity, into a foreign country. And it says here, maybe a combination of standard and non-standard approaches, where you have the way you distribute, like I mentioned in the Nestle case of with the buggies, or packaging, where you may package something slightly different. And you may know that if you use mayonnaise, that when you go in the refrigerator, you grab it and it's in a jar, right? It's in a glass jar and is recognizable. You go to Latin America, that mayonnaise is in a plastic bag with a spout on the top. That's the way it is packaged there. So it's slightly different. And, you know, have a picture behind me of mayonnaise in Latin America. McDonald's in France have muted colors and golden arches are more subtle. American franchisees saw the success in France and implemented similar renovations. And also in France, they have a McDonald's that's almost like a restaurant. You go in, there's silverware, and it has the ambiance of being like a restaurant. And also an interesting case in Israel, where because they have Orthodox Jews who cannot mix meat and dairy products, they have decided to distinguish kosher restaurants from non-kosher restaurants, that those Israelis who might be moderate Jews or those who may not practice, they want their cheeseburger. But Orthodox Jews don't want to take that chance, so McDonald's has allowed the franchise to create a different color scheme for kosher restaurants, which is blue and white. Still the golden arches, but the blue and white will signify that this is a kosher restaurant. There you have some of the different the marketing mix of McDonald's. And also, if we look at the expanse of marketing activities around the globe, as I stated before, there are 330 million people here in this country. So that means that most of the business is going to be outside of the country. And you can see the numbers here. Look at the different orientations as we close into the hour mark. That ethnocentric is the standardized approach that I talked about. Very little changes. You're just extending that product over. Polycentric, you're looking at a multinational approach where you're looking at each country differently and you're adapting products to suit each of those markets. You have regiocentric orientation. You're looking at different regions which may have similarities. And so you're able to get similar types of strategies for regions. Let's say, for example, if you're in Latin America or if you're in a particular region where the language is similar and some of the cultural traditions are similar, then you may be able to take a regiocentric approach. And then you have geocentric approach, which is a combination of strategies, both standardized and adaptation elements, which is essentially what Coca-Cola does. Coca-Cola is pretty much the same everywhere you go in the world. They make some slight changes to the packaging. Some countries mandate that Coca-Cola has to have it, the Coca-Cola lettering in their language. And so you have slight differences. If you have a chance, make sure you visit the Coke Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, because they have, they have the tour and they talk about the founding. But at the very end, they have a place where you can sample all of the different Coca-Cola drinks from around the world. and they have all these fountains, and you can just go and try as much as you like, and it's just very interesting to taste the different drinks that countries are having around the world.